Doctoral Candidacy Pronunciation and Shadowing Workout Part 1. Warm-up. Core academic words. Listen carefully. Repeat each word after you hear it. Education. Education. Educational. Educational. Educational equity. Educational equity.
Equity. Equity.
Equality.
Equality.
Inequality. Inequality. Justice. Justice. Social justice. Social justice. Educational justice. Educational justice. Access. Access. Opportunity. Opportunity. Educational opportunities. Educational opportunities.
Participation. Participation.
Inclusion. Inclusion. Exclusion. Exclusion. Distribution. Distribution. Redistribution. Redistribution. Recognition. Recognition. Representation. Representation. Now repeat the three dimensions together. Redistribution. Recognition. Representation. Redistribution. Recognition. Representation. Educational equity and justice. Educational equity and justice. Part 2. Word families. Listen to how the pronunciation changes within each word family. Educate. Education. Educational. Educationally. Educate. Education. Educational. Education is important. Educational opportunities are important. Educational equity is important. Now. Equal.
Equality.
Inequality. Unequal. Equal access. Equality of opportunity. Educational inequality. Unequal access to resources. Now. Represent. Representation. Representative. Underrepresented. Representation matters. Students need representation. Some communities may be underrepresented. Now. Recognize. Recognition. Recognized. Recognition matters. Students' experiences need to be recognized. Now. Distribute. Distribution. Redistribution. Resources are distributed. The distribution of resources matters. Redistribution is one dimension of justice. Now. Participate.
Participation.
Participant. Participants. Student participation. Research participants. Participation in virtual education. Part 3. The DJ sound. Listen carefully to the middle sound. Education. Education. Educational. Educational. Graduate. Graduate. Graduation. Graduation. Undergraduate. Undergraduate student. Undergraduate students. Individual. Individual. Individual experiences. Individual differences. Gradual. Gradually. Now shadow the complete phrases. Educational equity. Educational resources. Graduate students. Undergraduate students. Individual experiences. Individual resources. Gradual change. Educational experiences can differ among undergraduate students. Individual experiences may reveal educational inequalities. Part 4. Resources. Resource. Resources. Educational resources. Physical resources. Human resources. Digital resources. Social resources. Again. Physical resources. Human resources. Digital resources. Social resources. Infrastructure. Infrastructure. Digital infrastructure. Technological infrastructure. Connectivity. Connectivity. Internet connectivity. Limited connectivity.
Device.
Devices. Digital devices. Access to digital devices. Platform. Virtual platform. Learning platform. Learning management system. Support. Institutional support. Teacher support.
Peer support.
Family support. Now shadow the sentences. Students need access to adequate resources. Access to resources does not necessarily guarantee equitable participation. Physical, human, digital, and social resources interact in complex ways. Connectivity can facilitate participation in virtual education. Limited connectivity can constrain students' participation. Digital devices are important, but access to a device is not enough. Students may also need digital literacy and institutional support. Resources should not be understood in isolation. They interact with students' social and educational contexts. Part 5. Virtual English language education. Virtual. Virtual education. Virtual learning. Virtual English language education. Language. English language. English language education. Virtual English language education. Online. Online learning. Online education. Online English learning. Modality. Virtual modality. Educational modality. Now shadow. Virtual education can expand access to higher education. However, expanded access does not automatically produce educational equity. Students participate in virtual education under different material and social conditions. Some students have reliable internet access. Others experience connectivity problems. Some students have their own computers. Others depend primarily on mobile devices. These differences can shape students' educational experiences. Virtual English language education is therefore more than a technological modality. It is also a social and educational space. Part 6. Regional context region. Regional. Regional campus. Regional campuses. Territory.
Territorial.
Territorial context. Territorial differences. Urban. Rural. Urban and rural contexts. Public university. Higher education. Access to higher education. Now the names of the regions. Uraba.
Bajo Cauca. Magdalena Medio.
Apartado.
Turbo.
Caripa.
Caucasia. Puerto Berrío.
Now shadow. This study focuses on 3 regional contexts. The cases are located in Uraba, Bajo Cauca, and Magdalena Medio. These regions have different social, economic, geographic, and infrastructural conditions. The purpose is not to rank the regional campuses. The purpose is to understand students' experiences within their particular contexts. Regional differences matter. Territorial conditions matter. Access to infrastructure matters. But resources alone cannot explain educational equity. Part 7. Fraser. Justice. Social justice. Educational justice. Redistribution. Recognition. Representation. Listen again. Redistribution. Recognition. Representation. Now shadow. Nancy Fraser conceptualizes justice through multiple dimensions. In this study, 3 dimensions are particularly relevant: redistribution, recognition, and representation. Redistribution draws attention to the distribution of resources and opportunities. Recognition draws attention to identities, experiences, and cultural differences. Representation draws attention to participation and voice. These dimensions help me interpret educational equity and justice. However, they do not operate independently. Material conditions can affect participation. Recognition can influence students' sense of belonging. Representation can shape whose voices are heard. Together, these dimensions provide a broader understanding of justice. Part 8. Warschauer and resources: physical,
Human. Digital.
social, physical resources, human resources, digital resources, social resources. Now shadow. A resource-based perspective helps me examine more than access to technology. Students' experiences are shaped by different types of resources. Physical resources include devices and infrastructure. Digital resources include relevant digital content and online environments. Human resources include knowledge, skills, and support. Social resources include relationships and networks that may support participation. These resources interact. Their interaction may enable or constrain students' participation. Therefore, the central question is not simply whether students have technology. The question is how different resources interact within particular educational and territorial contexts. Part 9. Enable or constrain. Enable.
Enable participation.
Enable learning. Enable access.
Constrain. Contraint participation.
Constrain access. Constrain opportunities. Facilitate.
Facilitate participation.
Facilitate interaction. Challenge. Challenges. Educational challenges. Technological challenges.
Barrier.
Barriers. Educational barriers. Digital barriers. Now shadow. Resources can enable participation. Resources can also constrain participation. Technology can facilitate access. But technology can also reproduce existing inequalities. Virtual education can create opportunities. But those opportunities are not experienced equally by all students. This tension is central to my research. Part 10. Research question language explore. Examine. Understand. Analyze. Interpret. Identify. Interaction. Experience. Perception. Condition. Context. Now shadow. This study explores educational equity and justice in virtual English language education. It examines the experiences of students at regional campuses. It focuses on the interaction of physical, human, digital, and social resources. It asks how these resources may enable or constrain educational equity and justice. The study does not assume that technology is inherently equitable. Instead, it examines how technology operates within specific social and educational contexts. Part 11. Methodology Qualitative. Qualitative research. Qualitative study. Case. Case study. Multiple case study.
Cross-case. Cross-case analysis.
Cross-case comparison. Participant. Participants. Research participants.
Purposive.
Purposive sampling. Data. Data collection. Data analysis. Questionnaire. Interview. Document analysis. Now shadow. This research uses a qualitative multiple case study design. The study is informed by Stake's approach to multiple case study research. Each regional context is treated as a case. The cases are examined individually and comparatively. Cross-case comparison allows me to identify similarities and differences across contexts. The purpose is not statistical generalization. The purpose is to develop a contextualized understanding of the phenomenon. Part 12. Data collection questionnaire. Questionnaire. Interview. Interviews. Semi-structured interviews. Document. Documents. Document analysis. Platform. Virtual platform. Platform analysis. Now shadow. Data will be collected through different sources. These include a questionnaire, interviews, and document analysis. The questionnaire provides contextual information about students' access, resources, and experiences. The interviews allow students to describe their experiences in greater depth. Document analysis provides institutional and policy context. Together, these sources support triangulation. Triangulation allows the phenomenon to be examined from different perspectives. Part 13. Students' experiences. Experiences. Lived experience. Educational experience.
Perception.
Perceptions. Student perceptions.
Voice.
Student voice. Students' voices. Belonging. Sense of belonging. Now shadow. Students' experiences are central to this study. I am interested in how students experience virtual English language education. I am also interested in how they perceive the resources available to them. Students may experience the same educational program differently. Their experiences are shaped by material, digital, social, and territorial conditions. For this reason, students' voices are essential. Their accounts can reveal conditions that institutional statistics may not capture. Part 14. Important contrasts. Listen first. Access. Participation. Equality, equity. Availability. Usability. Technology experience. Individual, institutional.
Virtual, territorial.
Now shadow the contrasts. Access does not necessarily mean participation. Equality is not identical to equity. Availability does not necessarily mean accessibility. Having a platform does not guarantee meaningful participation. Having internet access does not guarantee a stable connection. Having a device does not guarantee an equitable learning experience. Individual difficulties may reflect broader institutional conditions. Virtual education is still shaped by territorial realities. Part 15. Academic connectors, however.
Therefore.
Moreover. Nevertheless. In contrast. In addition. For this reason. From this perspective. In this context. At the same time. Now shadow. Virtual education can expand access. However, access alone does not guarantee equity. Students may have access to the same platform. Nevertheless, their conditions of participation may be very different. Technology provides educational opportunities. At the same time, it may reproduce existing inequalities. For this reason, educational equity requires a broader analysis. From this perspective, resources must be examined in relation to students' contexts. Part 16. Thought groups do not pronounce these sentences word by word. Listen to the groups of meaning. This study explores educational equity and justice in virtual English language education. Again, this study explores educational equity and justice in virtual English language education. The study focuses on undergraduate students at 3 regional campuses of a public university. Again, the study focuses on undergraduate students at 3 regional campuses of a public university. I examine how physical, human, digital, and social resources interact to enable or constrain educational equity and justice. Again, I examine how physical, human, digital, and social resources interact to enable or constrain educational equity and justice. The study is particularly interested in students' experiences and in the conditions under which virtual education takes place. The goal is not to determine whether virtual education is good or bad. Rather, the goal is to understand under what conditions virtual education may reproduce or challenge existing inequalities. Part 17, Mini Presentation 1. The problem now shadow a complete academic explanation. Virtual education has become an important mechanism for expanding access to higher education. This is particularly relevant in regional contexts, where students may live far from major urban centers. However, expanding access does not necessarily guarantee educational equity. Students enter virtual education with different resources, different levels of connectivity, different digital skills, and different forms of social support. These differences may influence their ability to participate meaningfully in the educational process. For this reason, my study moves beyond the question of access. Instead, I examine how different resources interact to enable or constrain educational equity and justice in virtual English language education. Part 18, Mini Presentation 2. Why Resources Matter. Resources are central to my study. However, I do not understand resources simply as technological devices. I consider physical, human, digital, and social resources. For example, having a computer is a physical resource. But students also need the knowledge and skills required to use digital environments effectively. They may also need support from teachers, peers, family members, or the institution. Therefore, resources interact rather than operate independently. This interaction is particularly important when we examine educational equity. 2 students may technically have access to the same virtual course while experiencing very different conditions for participation. Part 19, Mini Presentation 3. Justice. My understanding of justice is informed by Nancy Fraser. Her framework allows me to examine justice beyond the distribution of material resources. Redistribution is important because students need adequate conditions and resources to participate. Recognition is important because students' identities, experiences, and contexts need to be acknowledged. Representation is important because students need opportunities to participate and have their voices heard. These dimensions are interconnected. Together, they allow me to examine educational equity and justice as multidimensional phenomena. Part 20, Mini Presentation 4. Methodology. Methodologically, this research is a qualitative multiple case study. The cases correspond to 3 regional contexts of the university. I selected these contexts because I am interested in understanding the phenomenon across different territorial conditions. The study uses multiple sources of information. These include a questionnaire, semi-structured interviews, institutional documents, and relevant aspects of the virtual learning environment. The different sources allow me to examine the phenomenon from complementary perspectives. The cross-case comparison will help identify both shared patterns and context-specific differences. Part 21. Candidacy questions. Now imagine that a committee member is speaking to you. Listen to the question. Then pause. Answer with the model. Question. What is your study about? My study explores educational equity and justice in virtual English language education at 3 regional campuses of a public university. Again, without reading if possible. What is your study about? My study explores educational equity and justice in virtual English language education at 3 regional campuses of a public university. Question. Why is this study important? This study is important because access to virtual education does not necessarily guarantee equitable educational experiences. Question. What do you mean by resources? I understand resources as physical, human, digital, and social resources that interact within students' educational contexts. Question: why did you choose a multiple case study? A multiple case study allows me to understand the phenomenon within different regional contexts and then examine similarities and differences across cases. Question: why are students' voices important? Students' voices are important because their experiences can reveal conditions and inequalities that may not be visible through institutional data alone. Question: how do you understand educational justice? I understand educational justice through the interconnected dimensions of redistribution, recognition, and representation. Question: are you assuming that virtual education creates inequality?
No.
I am not assuming that virtual education is inherently unequal. I am examining the conditions under which it may reproduce or challenge existing inequalities. Part 22, Fluency Challenge. Listen once. Then shadow without stopping. My research focuses on educational equity and justice in virtual English language education. I am particularly interested in undergraduate students at regional campuses and in the different conditions under which they participate in virtual education. Again, my research focuses on educational equity and justice in virtual English language education. I am particularly interested in undergraduate students at regional campuses and in the different conditions under which they participate in virtual education. Continue. Rather than focusing exclusively on access to technology, my study examines the interaction of physical, human, digital, and social resources. These resources may enable participation, but under certain conditions, they may also constrain it. Again, rather than focusing exclusively on access to technology, my study examines the interaction of physical, human, digital, and social resources. These resources may enable participation, but under certain conditions, they may also constrain it. Continue. From a social justice perspective, the study considers redistribution, recognition, and representation. These dimensions help me examine not only what resources students have, but also how their experiences are recognized and how they participate within the educational environment. Again, from a social justice perspective, the study considers redistribution, recognition, and representation. These dimensions help me examine not only what resources students have, but also how their experiences are recognized and how they participate within the educational environment. Part 23. Final 1-minute shadowing. Now speak with confidence. Do not try to pronounce every word perfectly. Focus on rhythm, stress, and meaning. My study explores educational equity and justice in virtual English language education at regional campuses of a public university. I am interested in understanding how physical, human, digital, and social resources interact within students' educational experiences. My starting point is that access alone does not guarantee equity. Students may have access to the same virtual program while participating under very different material, technological, social, and territorial conditions. For this reason, I examine not only the distribution of resources but also recognition and representation. Methodologically, I use a qualitative multiple case study to understand students' experiences within 3 regional contexts and to identify both common patterns and contextual differences. Ultimately, the study seeks to contribute to a more critical understanding of the conditions under which virtual English language education may enable, constrain, reproduce, or challenge educational inequalities. One more time. Slower.
Clearer.
More connected. And this time, do not read words. Communicate ideas.